and I am an international lawyer. I specialize in international criminal law, in human rights law, in universal jurisdiction, corporate accountability, and targeted human rights sanctions, mostly based in Canada.
Many Sudanese CSOs are involved in documenting mass atrocities as well as violations of international human rights. What is an area of documentation that you think is underreported?
So I think, as you said, there is quite a lot of reporting of conflicts and the harms that are caused, the incidents that occur, and even the immediate perpetrators of these incidents. But I think that sometimes what's missing or what's underexplored in this context is the larger ecosystem of how these conflicts are sustained or enabled, and the types of tools and resources that are used by different actors to actually commit international law violations or potentially international crimes.
So how can understanding the tools and resources that sustain and supply these conflicts help in contributing to accountability?
I think that there are 4 main reasons why understanding these tools and resources can actually be quite useful for accountability. So first of all, it allows us to link what's happening in the conflict to a broader range of actors. So not just looking at the soldiers and the immediate perpetrators or even the commanders in militaries or militia, but actually broadening the scope to understanding the different types of actors that are complicit or even enabling these types of international law violations from occurring. So, for example, corporate actors are often very much involved in conflict, and these types of actors are not immediately or obviously targeted when it comes to human rights documentation. In the same vein, it also allows us to better understand the different modes of liability that exist within a conflict. So not just the direct perpetrators, but also the indirect perpetrators. So we're looking at actors, including corporate actors, that are complicit, that are aiding and abetting, and that are in indirect ways supporting, sustaining, and enabling international law violations. A third reason is that it also helps us to better understand what other jurisdictions or what other forums might be available for accountability, especially when we're dealing with a conflict zone in a country where that jurisdiction might not be available immediately for accountability. So when you understand some of the broader actors that are involved and that are complicit in these types of violations, especially when those actors might be linked to foreign jurisdictions, then it also broadens the scope of where we can actually seek accountability. And finally, it also allows us to consider different forms of accountability beyond just criminal. So we tend to focus a lot on criminal justice, but when we think of corporate actors and their involvement in human rights violations, international law violations, and international crimes, we can also consider a broader form of justice or seeking justice, which includes civil accountability and using civil litigation and civil courts, or even administrative accountability. And so it really just broadens the scope of the strategies and the tactics that are available to seek redress for survivors and for victims.
So with this understanding in mind, in what ways do corporate actors contribute to conflict? What are the different ways in which they have influenced what happens on the battlefield, and what are some of the examples that you've seen from your experience?
So when we're thinking about how different types of actors are involved in conflict, and specifically when we're looking at corporate actors, there are different ways that they might be involved in any given context, and there are actual international law cases that can give us some very clear examples here. For example, the financial sector or financial services like banks, who are enabling access to financial markets of some of the actors that are then committing international law violations or committing international crimes. And this money, this access to money, is then resourcing these groups to commit these crimes. That's one example. Another example is also different types of resource or extractive companies. So we see, for example, oil, petroleum, energy companies that have operated in different conflict zones, And they can be complicit because they have been linked to, for example, paying military or non-state armed groups money so that they can continue operating in certain areas, so that they can access areas for their own activities. And in some cases, they're even complicit in different types of international law violations, such as forced displacement, so that they can operate in these zones. And also another example would be, for example, weapons manufacturers or weapons suppliers, exporters. The weapons industry is an area where we are seeing a lot of complicity. If you look at the types of rifles, the cars, the planes, all of these are being used to commit international law violations. So this is another industry, another area that is relevant. And I also think more and more, as we are seeing the emergence of different types of technologies, including digital technologies that are used for the repression of human rights or for surveillance, tech companies are getting more involved in conflict, and they're selling their technologies to states, but also non-state armed groups. And these technologies can also impact civilians during war and cause a lot of harm as well.
So bringing this back to Sudanese civil society organizations who are involved in the documentation, how can they contribute to corporate accountability? Is there a role that they can play?
I think it's a great question to think about the ways in which civil society groups, and specifically Sudanese civil society groups, can contribute to this type of strategic litigation or strategic thinking around accountability. And it's important to recognize that each civil society group will have its own set of skills and expertise, and they'll also have access to very specific type of information, and all of the different pieces need to fit together in order to have this bigger picture of exactly who's involved, how they're linked to other jurisdictions, and how we can think through accountability on a holistic level. So I think, for example, for Sudanese civil society groups that are documenting the harms that are occurring, the incidents that are occurring, and they're interviewing witnesses or survivors, there's certain types of information that they have access to about the harms that are happening and how those harms are happening. And they can ask questions, they can keep an eye open for the tools, the weapons, how are these harms happening in specific situations. And that information can then be linked to the work of internationalized civil society groups that are actually working on more thematic issues. So there are groups that are very much specialized in the financial tracing of assets to understand how the financial networks are supporting these conflicts. There are other groups that are looking at weapons specifically, or specific targeted areas that are relevant for this conflict. There are groups that specialize in open source investigations and are looking through hundreds, if not thousands, of videos and pictures. And so all of these pieces need to be connected so that we can better understand what are the corporate actors that are involved in this particular conflict, and also what jurisdictions are they linked to, and how can we think about holding them accountable abroad and in these other forums.
So international crimes cases often take a very long time. Is this also the case for corporate accountability cases? Would you say the same?
Unfortunately, yes. This is, I think, something that plagues all forms of legal processes. They are, in their nature, very slow-moving processes, and that's the same thing for corporate accountability. And I don't want to sit here to say that corporate accountability is the answer to all of the issues that are happening here. I think it's important to think of it as one other option, one other area, or one other opportunity, in addition to the other types of criminal justice cases that are currently being pursued, the international investigations at the international level, but also universal jurisdiction prosecutions that might be pursued as well. All of these are within, again, an ecosystem, and corporate accountability is one piece there. But it does take a lot of time, it does take a lot of resources, and it's not a very straightforward path either. And it can be a very complex and complicated case. And what we've seen in different jurisdictions, including in Canada, where I have a lot of experience, is that to know and to prove the linkages between a company and the crimes and to have plaintiffs that are actually going to bring a case, all of these pieces need to be there, and it can be very complicated and difficult to build these types of cases. But where there is an opportunity, we can test the law, we can see how far we can go, and it's always important to explore the options that are available.
Amanda Ghahremani, thank you so much for your time. We're grateful for the interview.
Thank you for having me.